Hi, Daredevil is back on TV with Daredevil Born Again, a new Disney Plus television show, and if you've been following the channel for any length of time, you know that I've done a lot of Daredevil videos. I've also done a video for every single season of Daredevil on Netflix, and so with Born Again coming around, I did have quite a few people asking if I would talk about the show in any length on the channel. And a lot of those questions were happening when the show just premiered, and now with the show having just wrapped up on Disney Plus, I've decided that I wanted to talk about it. And you'll probably know that I've done a lot of video essays with heavily scripted voiceovers over a lot of footage of the shows for all those seasons. And when it came to this show, I just didn't want to. And you might already know by watching the channel a lot that I have been showing up on camera more, so hopefully this isn't too big of a surprise to you. But I will be talking about Daredevil Born Again, the entire season, which is 9 episodes, at length. I'm going to start with some non-spoiler thoughts and my general thoughts on the show as a whole, and then I'll be getting into spoilers in the later part of this video. So if you have not seen Daredevil Born Again or haven't finished it yet, know that I will tell you when we get into spoilers. But for now, I'm going to give you my thoughts on Daredevil Born Again. I hope that you enjoy this, and let's go! So, Daredevil Born Again is 9 episodes, it's all on Disney Plus now, and it follows, of course, Matt Murdock, played by Charlie Cox, who is returning to the role of Daredevil after a pretty lengthy break from the Netflix show, which I believe wrapped up in 2018, when a lot of rights were changed and the show was effectively canceled as it was on Netflix. There was a lot of talk about bringing back Daredevil over time, and I believe that production officially started on the show in 2023, but it was 2020 or 2021 when it was officially announced that Charlie Cox would be returning as Matt Murdock and Vincent D'Onofrio would be returning as Kingpin. There wasn't a lot of discussion about what exactly that would look like when the show was still far from being in pre-production or production. But before that, we did have Charlie Cox show up as Matt Murdock in Spider-Man No Way Home, as well as in She-Hulk and in Echo. And we had D'Onofrio returning as Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, in Hawkeye for, I think he was in the last 2 episodes of that show, if I'm not mistaken, and then some brief periods in Echo as well. Now, to be completely honest and upfront with everything in my history with all the Marvel shows, I've watched, I'm thinking about it, it's been a little while, I've watched WandaVision, Captain Falcon and Winter Soldier, and Loki Season 1, as well as Hawkeye and Moon Knight. I got pretty burnt out pretty quick on the Marvel TV shows. I haven't talked about them a lot, really, on the channel, and if you've been following the channel, you'll know that my general coverage of comic books and superhero stuff overall has just really decreased in recent years. It's basically non-existent now. This is kind of an exception to the rule because I'm a big Daredevil fan in general, the character, the comics, the show, and I thought it would be fun to just, do like a light, easygoing video review on Born Again. So I'm not completely caught up on everything Marvel. I have missed out on, I'd say, the majority of the movies post-Endgame. As far as the shows that somewhat tie into Born Again, I did not see Echo, I did not see She-Hulk, but I didn't see a lot of other shows post Moon Knight. I think that Moon Knight was the last Marvel show that I watched. For example, I didn't watch Loki Season 2, even though I enjoyed Season 1. I think I've dealt with some major burnout with Marvel in general, and I think their output in the time since Endgame has been pretty poor. Some that I've enjoyed, Wakanda Forever and Guardians 3, I enjoyed those. I thought that No Way Home was solid. So in general, those are my thoughts on the MCU as it is today, as a sort of strange creature that doesn't have a lot to say and is continuing on and sort of biding its time until maybe these upcoming Secret Wars and what's the Doctor Doom one? Those are coming out eventually to kind of, I think it's going to be a soft reboot, right? So anyway, there's not a whole lot that you need to know prior to watching Daredevil Born Again. It is obviously helpful if you're already a pre-existing fan and if you have been following the Netflix show, for example, because it is a continuation. And I know that there was a lot of back and forth with Born Again. And what I think is important to note is that there was a lot of behind the scenes trouble and a lot of resets and redos and creative turnover behind the scenes. So they started shooting this show in 2023. It's 2025. It's middle of April 2025 when this show is now finished. So obviously that's a long turnaround. 2 years basically from beginning to shoot a show to getting it out for everyone to watch is really long. Even in today's sort of streaming miniseries and TV shows where there's long breaks between seasons, that's a long time in production and post-production. And so you may be familiar with this or you may not be, so I'm going to tell you about it a bit as we are diving into the show. And before I get into my general thoughts on the show, is that there was a different vision for the show when it first came about. And we had Charlie Cox and D'Onofrio attached already. And apparently what happened was the people that were behind the show had a different vision. And it was going to be an 18-episode season or series. I don't know if they were planning on more seasons or not. But an 18-episode season that was a lot more like a legal procedural and was more episodic in nature. And then what happened in 2023 was there was the Writers Guild strike in Hollywood, and that put everything on pause, including Born Again was in the middle of production at the time, so it shut down. And when that happened, Kevin Feige, the head of Marvel Studios, looked at everything that was happening with the show, and I believe that even Cox and D'Onofrio were dissatisfied with what was happening with the show, apparently. So you had a lot of people behind the scenes that were looking at it and scrutinizing it, and what happened to be a forced break in the production of the show. And what happened was they basically threw out most of the creative team that was behind the show. Let me get this right about who exactly was behind the show at the time. So originally the 2023 development had Matt Corman and Chris Ord as the head writers and executive producers. This was also when there wasn't a showrunner still for most of these Marvel TV shows, which is a very strange practice, and I think it really negatively affected a lot of these shows at that time. And there's also several directors that were in charge of batches of these episodes. So there was Michael Cuesta, Jeffrey Nachmanoff, and David Boyd, as well as Clark Johnson. And they were all set to direct a lot of these episodes and had already directed quite a few. Then, during the forced break because of the writer's strike, Corman and Ord were fired, and Dario Scardapane, who was a writer on the Punisher spin-off series, was hired to be the showrunner for Born Again. So now we've got a showrunner and a lot of changes behind the scenes, and a totally new direction for the show. This also meant that they brought on Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead as directors, who are largely indie filmmakers, but had also worked on The Moon Knight show and Loki Season 2. So there was a big change in direction for the show overall. And what a lot of people have said is that originally the episodic format really didn't connect to the Netflix show at all, and instead was doing its own thing, just kind of lightly referring to it. I know there was a lot of rumors that Foggy Nelson and Karen Page were completely out of the show, and we'll talk about their involvement in a few minutes when we get into the details of what the show is now. But they were completely left out and maybe slightly referred to in these episodes. And what the creative team have talked about is that the first episode of this series and the last 2 episodes of this season are completely brand new. So basically episodes 2 through 7, which are very episodic in nature, are kind of as they were with some light material added. And there was a lot of work that was done to sort of make it more serialized and add in bits and pieces of connective tissue into the larger storyline that I think is really kicked off in episode 1 and comes to more of a head in the 8th and 9th episodes. So what you have is kind of a strange show overall that is part episodic and part serialized, kind of doing its own thing, kind of being like the Netflix show, and then also being its own episodic creature that is kind of MCU-ish, but not totally. And I think that is the weakness of the show. Some of the creatives have specifically gone on record about what happened and what was behind the scenes. Scardapane said, "The first episode and the last 2 are brand spanking new," and said that the episodes directed by Cuesta, Nachmanoff, and Boyd, quote, received some rejiggering and new framing and bookends and stuff. But there are a couple that are 100% intact. Producer Sana Amanat said, most of the episodes we definitely added some things on, but otherwise, for the most part, those 6 episodes existed in large part as first conceived. I think you can really feel this in a lot of the middle episodes. For example, the bank heist episode really feels super episodic, and we have Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel's dad, show up as the assistant bank manager, who becomes sort of the secondary lead of this episode, where Matt Murdock is in a bank that gets robbed, and he sort of looks to thwart these bank robbers alongside Kamala's dad. And I think that is a solid episode, but it's very throwaway. And overall, again, we're going to get into spoilers in a second, but I would say that I am mostly disappointed with the show. I think it's fine, but I think it's very forgettable. I think that it isn't saying very much, and most of the show is coasting by on just saying, Matt Murdock is back. Charlie Cox is back as Daredevil. Look, he's back as Daredevil. Now he's connected to the MCU. And Kingpin is back with some status quo changes. But I really think that the show overall is coasting by on just saying that they're here. And there's not a lot for them to do otherwise. I think that what's very strange about this show is it feels a lot like filler a lot of the time. And what I did in preparation for making this review was I went back and I rewatched the show, the whole season, in preparation to watch the finale. Now, I'm recording this the day after the finale came out, so I've seen the finale once, and I've seen every other episode twice. I was watching week to week and catching up. Most of the time it was 1 episode per week. I believe that the first week had the first 2 episodes, and I think that episodes, I think it was 5 and 6, were released together, or it might have been 6 and 7. Those were the bank heist episode and the big Muse episode. And together, I think they highlight that there's not a whole lot that's going on in this show. For example, I think where it really begins to fall apart is if you say, what is the larger theme of Born Again Season 1? I think that the strength of the Netflix show is that there is a lot of thematic resonance, and there are strong thematic ties throughout each of those seasons. I think that Season 2 is the weakest, and it's hurt in large part because of Jeff Loeb's interference and the presence of the Hand, who I think are very boring villains in most Daredevil media, comics and shows. And that has less thematic ties. The stuff with the Punisher is the best stuff in Daredevil Season 2 because it has more thematic ties to Matt Murdock's journey as Daredevil, his relationship to violence, his relationship to the system. But otherwise, it's a less thematically interesting season, and it makes it a lot weaker. The same thing goes for the Defenders miniseries, which is just a team-up show and has nothing else really going on for it. But seasons 1 and 3 of the Netflix show have a lot of thematic resonance to them because they are about Matt Murdock's faith, his relationship to his Catholicism, how he lives out his sense of justice as well as his violence and anger through his Daredevil persona, and where that line is with seeking justice but refusing to kill, and how that intersects with characters like Kingpin or characters like Bullseye. And then, of course, with Punisher in Season 2, or Elektra, and that makes it really interesting. Now, what I found was interesting was there is very, very, very little discussion of Matt's faith in Born Again, which I think becomes a really big weakness. There is overtones made to his faith a bit because there's one point where he's sort of outside the church and he's using his heightened senses to hear the sermon that's going on. There's a point where he's praying, where he's saving White Tiger's niece, and there's a little bits here and there, but otherwise it's just small references that are happening, talking about, that he still has his faith, but he's not really sort of developing it a lot. Now, at close to the end of Season 3, Father Lantom, the priest who's a major character throughout the Netflix show, is killed by Bullseye while saving Karen. So we lack this figure of faith where Matt can have these really interesting discussions. And I think one of the best things about the Netflix show were the conversations. There was a lot of interesting discussion about what it means to be this vigilante, or what is justice, or whether God exists or not, or the presence of God in our lives. And it was really, really interesting to me. And it made those shows, those episodes, really great and really thematically rich and something to sink my teeth into, which I really tried to do with the video essays that I put together, and hopefully you enjoyed them. That's lacking in Born Again. It's not there at all. And instead, I don't think that there's anything all that interesting that comes in place. Now, for a while, I thought that this show was going to talk more about the justice system and its strengths, its weaknesses, its corruption, and what that means for Matt and his place as Daredevil, or what it means for the rise of the Kingpin and the way that he sort of co-opts the police and the justice system to suit his own gains as he becomes mayor at the end of the first episode. And instead, it's more used just as sort of a conflict, or sort of a way to further, Kingpin's agenda, or sort of pushing Matt to fight people, right? Or to become Daredevil again. And because of that, I think it's really lacking in a lot of what, if anything, the show is trying to say. What has to be talked about a bit is that this is adapting a run from Charles Soule, sort of lightly, in the comics, where Wilson Fisk becomes the mayor of New York. That's the major sort of plot development that happens in this season. That happens in the episode 1 of the season, and it doesn't really develop much further until the very end. And then, of course, a character like Muse is also from the Soule run, and he's in here, and I think that character's a big disappointment. And then, so Soule was writing that run when Donald Trump was elected president of the United States for his first term. I think it was used as a bit of a commentary on that. And now we're back to adapting this. Trump is in his second term, but this was started before that happened, before he was elected president. And I think that there are commentaries to a degree of using Kingpin as this Trump-like stand-in, and sort of his co-opting of the police force, or this corruption that you could see as being sort of a Trump stand-in. Now, obviously, some people who like Trump aren't going to like that assessment and that comparison, and some people that hate Trump might like that comparison. Now, my own feelings aside, my own politics aside, I think that the show and the way they use the character and its comparisons in that just aren't really all that interesting. It's very light. In the final episode, we're not really getting into spoilers yet. There's language used of like resist, things like that you often see used in strong opposition to Trump and his policies and his actions as president. And so I think that the final episode makes that a little bit clearer in that comparison, but I don't think there's all that much that's interesting that's being said. I don't think that in this season, Kingpin is a very interesting character at all. And his wife, Vanessa, is not a very interesting character either. And their relationship isn't very interesting. And I think that there is just a sort of some overtones made in generalities to political issues, right? There's this section of the police that is used as this anti-vigilante task force. They worship the Punisher. They wear the Punisher symbol. And it has some parallels to real life in cops that wear the Punisher symbol. And frankly, how screwed up that is. And there's overtones to that, but I don't see these cop figures as being very interesting and having much more than just being like, physical opposition, enemies to fight. There is one cop character introduced early on. He begins to seem a little bit more like a complex figure at one point, and then he sort of just devolves into being one of the anti-vigilante cronies. And honestly, it's like, I don't think that anyone should have their, even if you're super conservative, if you're Republican, and if you're pro-Trump, I don't even think that you could have your political sensibilities all that offended by this show. because it's not saying a whole lot. It's just not. It's just saying like, corrupt people in power is bad. And yes, I agree. And I think most people would agree. And this use of, governmental power and using the police to sort of further your agenda. And of course, that's bad. But what are we saying like beyond that? I just don't think there's a lot of thematic resonance to this series overall. Now, obviously, maybe season 2 will be able to have more interesting goings on happening and have a more cohesive outlook on the show, because I believe that there aren't any episodes that were shot that before the overhaul that would go into season 2. Now, this was originally going to be an 18-episode show, and instead it's a 9-episode first season and I believe an 8-episode second season. There's also a Punisher one-shot that will happen. Besides that, I don't know where that will go. Again, I haven't gotten really into spoilers yet of where this season leaves off, but it is very much a cliffhanger. It is much more along the lines of, say, something like Empire Strikes Back, if you were to compare that to the tone of the end of this season. Not that big of a spoiler. But it doesn't give you a lot of conclusion or resolution or satisfaction, even with just where the story ends. Because I'm fine with seasons having a dark ending or there needing to be more story to come, but it's really not left off in a satisfying place. I'm going to get into some spoilers. So overall, I don't think that Born Again is a bad show. I don't think it's a good show. And that makes it harder to talk about. When we talk about things online, I think that it's easy for people to speak in hyperbole and for people to really push into extremes, where sometimes I find, and I've even heard other creators say, that if they don't love something, they feel like they have to hate it. And that's never really been my thing. I actually find that flaws and things that have interesting shortcomings are easier to talk about sometimes and are more interesting to talk about than something that I just straight up love. And when you just hate something, like I really, I'm not that interested in just blah, 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 just vomiting all this hate about something that usually isn't all that important, a movie or a show or a book. You just move on. I just like to move on. But this is a show that I would give like a 6.5 out of 10 to. That's not that special. And so it's harder to say, to be super excited, right? To say, oh, well, when you love something, it's great to, really dig into it. Or if you hate something, to be like, here's where it went wrong. Instead, it's not quite this and it's not quite that. You can see the episodic format in a lot of it. You can see the serialized formatting happening at the beginning and the end, and sort of added in bits and pieces throughout to try and string it all together. And instead, it kind of doesn't really work in either case. And I found myself by the end sort of wishing that it was actually stayed episodic. I would have maybe preferred the show to be much more heavily episodic and be satisfied with that, instead of having this bombastic approach to trying to keep it serialized and coming up short a lot, because I think it comes up short a lot in its serialized formatting. And instead to say it's fun and Daredevil's back and we're just having a good time and we're digging into the legal procedural of it all. Because my favorite episode is episode 3, which is the trial of the White Tiger. I think that is by far the best episode of the entire season, easily. And that's mostly a remnant of that original team and their episodic legal procedural approach. I thought it was great, and was emotionally a big gut punch and had a lot of interesting conversations, strong character work. And that was better, I think, than most of the other episodes. So I think that's just an interesting sort of case for one side over the other. And in the end, maybe it would have been better if it was just episodic, or if they scrapped more and really pushed into the serialized nature, like the Netflix show. Because in the end, I don't think it's strong enough either way for this to really be a lasting in the mind, like a lot of those Netflix shows did. And again, I'm not that mad about it. I think when I was rewatching the episodes for this, I found myself finding that it was very forgettable, and that a lot of the episodes that I enjoyed more on first watch were less enjoyable on second watch, because it was specific moments that stood out to me for most of those episodes. A singular fight, a singular conversation, like Matt and Frank having their tense sort of conversation in their episode where Punisher comes back, and a lot of things being forgettable. A lot of things with Kingpin saying, close the docks, or, I'm going to push through this agenda, and things like that, just sort of being forgettable. And the stuff with BB, Ben Urich's niece, sort of on the street and giving us a sort of a... Have you ever watched Boondock Saints? Do you remember Boondock Saints? Boondock Saints is a movie that's only good when you are like an 18-year-old in the 2000s. Otherwise, if that's not you, an 18-year-old boy in the 2000s, if that's not you, you probably aren't going to enjoy it. And at the end of that movie, they cut to the random, like, people on the street being asked about the Saints, giving their thoughts about, like, vigilante justice, and then the movie awkwardly ends. And it's a very strange ending to that movie. It doesn't really work. And that just keeps happening, like, keeps getting inserted into a lot of these episodes. And I found like that was often not working. That doesn't really go anywhere. That doesn't pay off. There's a lot of just like these random characters that are added in. Again, I'm still in non-spoilers. Sorry. And I found that Karen and Foggy are not in most of this show. And instead we have characters like Heather and Kirsten McDuffie that are added in as our sort of core around Matt, and they aren't very interesting, and they don't add a lot to the show, and end up being pretty ineffective and not really necessary by the end of the season. And I sort of wonder what their place will be in season 2, because they just didn't add very much at all. Being that I know people have very mixed opinions on Karen and Foggy in the Netflix show, but I think that both of them became very good and very important characters, by season 3. And so to have that cut short sucks. Anyway, those are my non-spoiler thoughts. 6.5 out of 10. Fine. Nothing to get worked up about. Nothing to say Disney... You can't say Disney ruined Daredevil, because there's nothing in here that I would say goes against what was really formed for this version, right? It's a fairly intact version of the character. Charlie Cox is great. Charlie Cox, Vincent D'Onofrio are two of the best actors in the MCU. John Bernthal also. Those three are probably the top 3 actors in the entire MCU. They could act most anyone else in that in that series of films and TV shows under the table. And then you get to have them have scenes with each other. And that's just a joy. And I think their scenes are well written together, their conversations. The highlight of the show, I would say, beyond anything else. And so it's worth it for that. And again, we're not degrading these characters and we're not ruining these stories, but we're not really doing anything all that interesting. We're not really progressing into new ideas and worthwhile times. It's just, this is sort of like, when you come off of a few great runs on a comic book and someone else comes in and it's like, it's fine, but it's not really going to be remembered, especially in the shadow of those other runs, that, you're not really going to think about it all that much when it's over. And I've found a lot of those episodes already kind of fading even after a rewatch. Let's get into spoilers now. So, spoilers. So the first immediate spoiler of Born Again is that the opening of the season has Foggy Nelson murdered by Bullseye. This was a rumor for a while. The rumor for the show before the creative overhaul was that Foggy and Karen would have been killed before the show even started, which I thought was a horrible idea. I thought it's a bad idea to kill off those characters for this show. And I think it's a very, very bad idea to just be like, oh no, they died, right? But oh no, Foggy, he's dead. Karen, she's dead. Anyway, here's the show. I think that would be a very bad idea. And so Foggy dies at the beginning. He's killed by Bullseye in this attack. And then there's a long fight between Daredevil and Bullseye through Josie's bar with a lot of people dying. And it's sort of a type of a oneer that they did in the Netflix show that they became famous for because of that hallway fight in season 1. And obviously they tried to recreate that in season 2 and 3 and the Defenders, and now they're doing it here. It's a good fight. It is kind of compromised by a lot of weird CGI added in at times, a lot of CGI smoke, which I'm sure was there to sort of stitch together multiple shots, and stunt actors doing cowboy switches. And Foggy dies. Matt pushes Bullseye off the top of the like 4 stories up to kill him. Bullseye survives, and Matt quits being Daredevil. And I think it jumps to about a year later after that. In essence, it is essentially the death of Elektra in Frank Miller's comics, but using Foggy as the person that's killed by Bullseye. And again, like, there's this long fight in the comics that happens afterwards where Daredevil basically drops Bullseye to what should be his death, and instead he's paralyzed. And that's kind of what happens here, to a lot of that. This isn't really taking from any singular comic. Again, you get the Mayor Fisk stuff from Soul and Muse, and then you've got this little bit of, him, the death of Elektra, but for Foggy, and things like that. And then sort of leading into close to the end of a type of Devil's Reign that's happening as, again, spoilers, Fisk declares martial law in New York and has this war against vigilantes, and that's where we end the season. Also, I think it's funny that Fisk's big campaign is that vigilantes are now illegal. When vigilantes, by definition, are illegal, this is like in The Dark Knight Rises when the Dent Act made crime illegal. And now crime is now against the law. And I just okay, what are we saying here? What are we trying to do? It's weird. It doesn't make any sense. So you get Foggy killed, and again, that kind of forces Karen out of the show. You find out that she left New York, she went to San Francisco. It was a little bit of a nod to Daredevil's history. And Deborah Ann Wool as Karen comes back briefly in the first episode, and then she comes back in the final episode, which seems to me that means that she will be back in a much heavier focus in season 2. We'll see. But then we kind of go and Fisk becomes this. Runs for mayor, and he had his trial, his conviction thrown up because of corruption. But that doesn't make any sense because he was the cause of the corruption. I think we're trying to just brush a lot of things under the rug to get this character back out of jail and in the focus for this show. And he's trying to be mayor, and Vanessa's kind of taken over as the new kingpin. And you find out that she had an affair when he'd been shot in both eyes by Echo, apparently, and it took a little while to heal, but he's better now. I guess if Michael Myers could get shot in both eyes and be fine, then I guess Kingpin can be too. I don't know, guys. I don't know. That doesn't make any sense either when you really think about it. And so a lot of the focus of the first half of the season, maybe even through episode 7 or so, is that Vanessa and Wilson have a very rocky marriage and are deciding whether they're going to stay together or not. And this whole affair that she had, they're having marriage counseling by Heather, who becomes Matt's girlfriend for this season. And that sort of adds this complexity to their relationship and what's going on with everything. And all to say, you shouldn't invite your therapist to the gala that you're throwing on and then dance with her. That's kind of against a lot of HIPAA and things like that. I don't recommend that. I don't think that most people should do that. And if you're a therapist and are invited, you should probably politely decline. And there's this talk of vigilantes and whether they're good or not, and Heather's interested, and then she becomes anti-vigilante because she shot Muse. It doesn't make any sense about why she turns on Daredevil or not. Muse overall is a very disappointing character. This must have been a leftover from the episodic nature, where he's kind of a freak of the week. If you're familiar with, say, the X-Files format or Supernatural or anything that's episodic and you have your characters encountering like a new villain every week. Muse is very much that, which I think is really disappointing because they set up this character in the first episode, painting these murals, which you find out are made from people's blood. That's the only thing that he shares kind of with the comic version. In the comics, he's an Inhuman, and he has like super strength and speed. And here he's just a guy. He's just a crazy guy who drains people's blood and paints murals. And eventually, Daredevil fights him a couple times, and then he has this fight where he's trying to kill Heather, who's his new therapist, and she shoots him, and then he's dead. And it's very disappointing. And that character adds nothing, and it doesn't add much to the show, like, at all. And I found that to be a very disappointing development in this season. They could have done more with that character, or they could have just sort of had him be much more of a one-off. Because I found that because of this episodic nature, a lot of things that become the focus in the middle episodes, like the White Tiger, like Muse, like these various different cases that Matt takes on, or the different mobs and gangs that are intersecting with Vanessa and Wilson, don't matter by the last two episodes, by episodes 8 and 9. It really doesn't matter. Or for example, Matt runs into the Punisher. He finds him, has this conversation with him, which I think is a really good conversation, and sort of ties back in by the end when the Punisher comes back as this hyper-violent ally to Matt and kills a bunch of these corrupt cops, and that ties into that. But that's clearly something that was added in the new creative direction to have that. I enjoyed that. I thought that was a really good conversation, talking with these two talking about Foggy being killed, what is justice, should Bullseye be killed, and how that affects Daredevil. And eventually, you do get Matt putting on the costume again by, I guess it would be, I don't know, episode 7, where he becomes Daredevil again. I thought that one of the strengths of the show was that I was fine with him not being in costume for most of it, because they did other things with the character that were interesting. And then he fights Muse and kind of gets back into the superhero life because of that, which puts him more in the crosshairs of Fisk. But I mentioned my favorite episode of the season was episode 3, which was the White Tiger trial, where Hector Ayala gets involved in this fight with people he doesn't realize are cops when they're attacking an informant, and one of the cops is killed when he falls in front of a oncoming train, and then he's put on this case with Matt defending him. And I thought that episode 3, this whole trial, everything that was happening in the courts, everything that they're trying to do around it to win the case, winning the case, and the tragedy that happens after was really, really strong. You get this interesting backstory for Hector, his own life, who he is. I know the actor that played him passed away after filming, which is very sad. I believe it was cancer, and the episode is dedicated to him. And at the end of the episode, he is killed by someone wearing a Punisher symbol that you find out is affiliated with this, anti-vigilante force. And it's tragic. It's really sad. It's the high point of the entire season. And it has so little to do with much else that happens in the show, which says a lot about the show. So that's unfortunate. I would highly recommend watching that episode for anyone that was interested in the show. And it's just a really tragic episode, but really well done. Which brings me to one of my complaints, which is that you find out that the character that killed Hector is Cole North, who is in the show. Now, in the comics, Cole is this, he's an internal affairs officer who becomes very disillusioned with the police and ends up first hunting Daredevil and then aligning with him. And in this show, he's just a straight up horrible person who has killed multiple people already as a cop. You find out he killed the White Tiger, and then he becomes part of this force. And then in the finale, he fights, along with a lot of the other police, he fights Daredevil and Punisher, and then he's blown up off screen by a giant grenade. Horrible Horrible treatment of this character. I have no idea why they decided to make this person Cole North. It could have been anybody. It did not have to be that character. That is, I don't usually get mad about adaptations of characters. He's such a good character in Chip Zdarsky's run, and is so interesting and complex. It could have added so much to any show, and they do that. Horrible idea. Horrible idea. And I just don't know why they did that. So, I'm kind of skipping around here, but I'll jump to the end now. We'll just talk about the last little bit, which is that, Fisk is kind of, for a while it seemed like he's on the up and up, and then eventually he gives in to being a much darker figure again, a lot of corruption, becoming basically the Kingpin again, but now as mayor, and he enacts these lockdowns, declares martial law. The vigilante task force is out. They're fighting Punisher and Daredevil. And so in the second to last episode, Bullseye comes around again. He escapes, and he decides to kill Fisk. He shoots at Fisk with a sniper rifle, and Matt decides to jump in front of the bullet and save Fisk, and that's the end of the second to last episode. He's been shot. Oh my God, what's going to happen? He's in the hospital, and then he's fine. There's a little bit of blood. He got shot in the heart, by the way. He got shot in the heart without wearing anything, and then he's fine. That is, oh my gosh, what happened? And then they ask him, why did you save Fisk? Why did you take a bullet for him? And all he says is, that's a good question. That's it. That doesn't, Daredevil would not jump in front of a bullet for the Kingpin. He just would not. I'm sorry. In any case, in the comics, in the Ben Affleck movie, in anything else in this show, he would not do that. He would say, "Oh, that's too bad. Maybe he deserved it," and that's it. It does not make any sense why he jumped in front of the bullet. It's just a way for the show to keep going. But why they do this? This isn't real life. This is not a documentary. You did not have to have it go down that way. It just do something else. I don't know. And then because of that, Kingpin goes crazy and he crushes the commissioner of police's head, which is super, super violent. The final episode is ultra violent. Whereas I think most of the rest of the show is actually fair, not that bloody, fairly tame. It's got good action, but it's less bloody than I'd say a lot of the Netflix show. And then the final episode is just a crazy gore fest with Punisher just cutting people up and people getting their heads crushed and all this sort of stuff, which is really kind of jarring in comparison to most of the rest of the show. And the final episode just jumps around all over, where it's chaos in New York and they're fighting the cops, and there's a lockdown, and nothing really kind of happens. You think you're going to get into this final big confrontation between Kingpin and Daredevil, and that doesn't happen at all. It just becomes that Daredevil is hiding out in the closed down Josie's bar with Karen, and they're saying, we're going to have an army. And it's Josie, the older lady who runs the bar, and a few cops, and Karen and Daredevil, and we're going to take back the city. And Punisher's been captured along with other people, and he escapes in the mid-credits, and that's it. That's a great army. This is the MCU. Spider-Man lives there. Doctor Strange lives there. They're literally there as the Kingpin is burning down the entire town. Even if the Avengers are out of town, they're there. Moon Knight is there. Even if the Defenders come back, Iron Fist and Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, and they're all there. You're now in the MCU, but very much so, and none of that matters. It's don't think about this show. This show should not be thought about. If you enjoy it, don't think about the show, because the more you do, the less sense that it makes, and the worse it becomes. And unfortunately, I am now thinking about the show to make this video, and it's still a 6.5 out of 10, but it's got some very glaring weaknesses to it overall. And we'll see where season 2 goes. We'll see how they sort of redirect the show with this, full-on creative direction, and not this vestigial tale of the original vision that came before. because in the end, I think that a lot of the show ends up just being set up for season 2. Most of it doesn't matter. And it's really the final episode that has anything to do with the plot of the show. Even when I think that standalone stuff might end up being better. And that's about it. That's really everything that happens in Born Again. And those are my general thoughts. It's a disappointment, I would say, for sure. I would say that a lot of Marvel shows are disappointments that I watch. That's kind of why I stopped watching Marvel shows. I always thought that they started strong and they ended weak. Things like Hawkeye and Moon Knight and Falcon and Winter Soldier, they all ended weak. And I just got really tired of it. So I stopped watching. And this wasn't like it was like a high and then went down. It was more like a strong start, peaking at episode 3, getting a little weird in some of those middle episodes, and then just kind of stumbling to the end. So it didn't drop off a cliff, but it never really did a ton for me in the end, which is just unfortunate. Those are my general thoughts on Born Again. Thank you for watching. This is a kind of an oddity, I would say, in the videos that I make, but I hope that you enjoyed it. It was fun to talk about it for a while. And, if you're interested in my other thoughts on Daredevil, I put everything together in a big compilation earlier this year, or I have my individual videos on the Netflix show Seasons, or a lot of different comic book stories. They're all there. Comic books and superheroes and pretty much Daredevil are all dead on the channel. And I'm glad they are. I really don't enjoy mostly talking about them anymore. And hopefully other people enjoy not hearing about those things either, because it's a lot more fulfilling to me to not talk about them really at all. But thank you for watching. Thanks to my YouTube members and patrons for their support and for just continuing to help the channel. I always do a loose review every month that's voted on by my members and patrons. The latest one was a dual review of Stephen King as Richard Bachman's The Running Man and the Arnold Schwarzenegger film adaptation. I enjoyed doing that one a lot. That was also me on camera, a lot more loose format. And we've got a lot of fun stuff coming up after this for the channel. The next video, I guess I can spoil a little because I already finished it, for next week is The Invisible Man, which is the next step in my long-running Universal Monsters retrospectives. I had a lot of fun making that. And we're going to do a lot of fun stuff on the channel this year, and I'm having a great time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. And we will see where Daredevil Season 2 brings us. And I believe that comes out next year, 2026. I hope it's better. We'll see.